Alright, in this video I'm going to introduce you to the biopsychosocial model, which really forms the basis of health psychology. So where we left off in the last video was we had talked about the biomedical model, also the psychosomatic model of medicine, and so we were just starting to see inklings of psychology being brought back into the thinking about health and wellness. And so but the biomedical model dominated for a long time. It really isn't until like the 1970s plus that the biopsychosocial model starts to come into favor, and even now we still see a lot of tension between these two models in modern medicine. And so though the biopsychosocial model is certainly dominant in health psychology, we still see a lot of biomedical focused approaches to medicine. And so this is particularly why health psychology is an important field. So we had left off with that biomedical model, and so that was very successful in many ways. If we look at that, was emerging around the 1900s. You can see what people were dying from at that time. These are the leading causes of death. This is in the United States in the 1900s, and so lots of people dying of diphtheria, accidents, all kinds of cerebrovascular diseases, gastrointestinal infections, tuberculosis, pneumonia, influenza. And then you can look at, in 2010, we see that most of those things have pretty much disappeared off of the leading causes of death, or they've become very small here. And now the leading causes of death are cancer and heart disease. We can look at this also in Canada and see a very similar pattern of responses. You certainly don't need to know any of the details of these things, but showing the same pattern that in the 1900s and stuff, many people were dying of influenza and bronchitis and pneumonia, and dying as children, dying of tuberculosis and things like that, and other communicable diseases. And now, again, most of those things have disappeared, and the things that are the leading causes of death are cancer, cardiovascular disease, stroke, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and things like that. And so this is a very different pattern of illness and of the illnesses that are leading to death. And there's several reasons for this. And so this is, in part, we can evaluate the success of the biomedical model in looking at those patterns. And what we see is that it was very effective in treating acute illnesses, so those that are caused by specific pathogens, specific foreign bodies that get into the body and lead to illness. And so these were things like smallpox and tuberculosis and polio, and for the most part, these are things that we no longer need to fight against in developed society. That's changing a bit as people become anti-vax in particular areas, and we see resurgences of these things, but we do have the medical procedures needed to treat, cure, and prevent many of these things. And so this shows the success of the biomedical model in addressing things that do have clear medical precursors in medical or biological indices in the body. But then it also, because of this, has led to us leading much longer lives, right? If everybody's not dying in infancy or dying every time you get a nasty cut and it gets infected, we're going to live a lot longer. And so this also leaves us a much longer life to accumulate more of these long-term illnesses or chronic illnesses. And so where the biomedical model really fails is that it doesn't do a great job addressing or accounting for the illnesses that involve a slow accumulation of damage over time. And so this can be heart disease, right? That's really about long-term, your blood smashing into your heart or clogged arteries and wearing away at the junctions there and leading to heart problems. And so these are also, it's not only that these things can take a time to accumulate in the body, and so as we're living longer, we're more likely to have them. They're also, importantly, illnesses that once you have them, you may cope with them for a long time or potentially even for the rest of your life. We have a lot of chronic illnesses now that people face, and we'll be talking a lot about that in this course, like heart disease and diabetes. And so these are very important things that we need to be also working to be able to treat, and the biomedical model does not do as great of a job with those. There's not clearly necessarily one thing you can go in and intervene and fix. Certainly we have medical treatments for diabetes, but also there's a lot of lifestyle factors that are involved in that, particularly in type 2 diabetes. And so this is part of what spurs the need for the biopsychosocial model that we're going to introduce in a second. And just to give you a few more stats, you can tell I like stats and graphs. And again, you don't need to memorize any of these things. certainly, but it's just interesting to see this data. If you look at, again, all these leading causes of death in Canada, many of them do have behavioral factors that are involved in them. This is not true for all types of cancer, but many types of cancer, like skin cancer, there are behaviors that we can engage in, like putting on sunscreen when we're going to be outside, that can help to prevent that. Right? So there are behaviors involved in that. There are behaviors involved in many types of heart disease, including exercise and diet. There are behaviors involved in many types of strokes. Again, not all. There's behaviors involved in respiratory diseases. So smoking is certainly one of the leading causes of respiratory problems. Accidents, there's also behaviors that are involved in this, reckless driving, drunk driving, accidents while handling weapons, all kinds of things like that also have behaviors involved in them. Same with diabetes. Again, not always with type 1 diabetes, but type 2 certainly has lifestyle factors that can be involved in that. And then not so much, at least that we're aware of, for Alzheimer's, although there is some evidence that doing lots of crossword puzzles and cognitive games can help with that. But so anyway, the point here being that we really need to be addressing these behaviors, right? We said that's one of the central goals of health psychology, but our behaviors matter too. It's not just what's physically happening in our bodies, but also our behaviors can impact that itself. So we sort of already started to evaluate this biomedical model, but just to repeat, it's dualistic, right? It's treating the mind and body as separate. And this works for some diseases and disorders in treating them where there really is a very clear, specific biological basis, but many things that we cope with now, they really do have psychological and social factors that are involved as well. And we'll see this a lot, particularly when we talk about chronic illnesses and things like that, right? We have to really manage our pain, and we'll see there's a lot of psychology involved in that. Pain is not a straightforward physiological process. Pain is all in the mind, and so we'll talk about that. So this really opens up this need to look at these behavioral, social, and psychological factors and their impact on health. And then this also allows us to approach that World Health Organization definition of health as not just being a lack of illness or a lack of some physical problem in the body, but being about functioning well, having social and emotional well-being in addition to physical health. So that brings us to the 1970s and beyond with the biopsychosocial model, and as I said before, these are still sort of competing now, and we'll touch on lots of examples of that in the class, but the most current model would be the biopsychosocial model. So what is that? We've already been mentioning it a lot, but we can break down that word. It's bio, psycho, and social factors, and so looking at this is not a full list of all of these things, but biological factors, so everything from the biomedical model is still included in the biopsychosocial model, still looking at organs and cells and tissues and biochemicals and all of that, so still very much looking at the physiology, but also looking at psychological factors like motivation. We're going to cover that a lot in this class, focus on the motivations that underlie our behaviors and that we engage in and our success in making important behavior changes to impact our health. Beliefs matter. What we think matters. We are humans with ideas, and those ideas impact what we do and our health outcomes. Our emotions matter as well. We'll talk about the intersection of our emotions and health outcomes. Attitudes matter. Behaviors as well. These are all going to be under the psychological factors. Also social factors, well, right? The culture that we're embedded in has all kinds of implications for how we think about and treat health, and also how we interact with ourselves and our psychology, and so this is going to be an important factor. Stigma, we're going to have a lecture that talks about the impacts of being a member of a devalued or stigmatized group and the impact of that on health, and so the social factors in that. The community that you have around you is an important factor impacting health, and that's one of the social factors we'll look at. Family as well is just a more specific example of your broader community. And social class as well. This is an important social factor that certainly has very strong health implications. So just to give an example to sort of motivate the importance of this psychosocial model is that even for something simple like a cold, right? There's clearly something that gets into your body that leads you to get sick. But even for something like a cold, there's still clearly other factors that are involved. So some early work from Sheldon Cohen, who did a lot of research on colds and the transmission of colds and the factors that lead people to come down with a cold when they're exposed to a cold virus. So what they did in this study is that they give all the participants, they expose them directly to a cold virus. Usually they squirt it up your nose so that they know that you've got that in your body, and then they quarantine everyone and see what happens. And not everybody develops a cold, right? So if it's just about having this virus in your body, then everyone should then get that cold, but they don't. And so now the answer to you might seem obvious. Why? Well, people have different strength immune systems. When someone's under stress, they might be more likely to get sick. But this is all very new. So this is very new ideas starting really in the 1970s and beyond, to be looking at what are the other factors that lead people to be more or less susceptible to coming down with something when they're exposed. And so, those who develop a cold are more likely to have had a stressful experience, to have fewer positive emotions, to have less active social life, to have less diverse social networks than people who did not develop a cold. And so it's not just about exposure to a virus. There's also other factors, psychological and social, that come into play in our experience of illness. I posted as well just this short video. This is just a fun one that talks about the placebo effect, and I'm going to talk about this here as well, but you can watch that video. It's posted. And I'm using this as an example as well to also talk about the importance of looking at these psychological and social factors and thinking about health, and the placebo effect is a very clear example of that. And so you can see the placebo effect in all kinds of things, right? You can give people a pill and they may show reduction in their symptoms, even though there's no active ingredients in that pill. And as that video talks about, that actually the more involved that treatment seems to be, that placebo treatment, the more effective it is. And so if just a pill will have some effect in terms of treating that person's symptoms, again, even though there's no active ingredients. But if you give them a fake shot, a placebo shot, that's likely to be even more effective. And so there's all kinds of features of the specific placebo itself that impacts its efficacy. And this suggests that there's really some psychological things going on there, and that there's expectations about how effective this is likely to be that are impacting the physiological response our body is having to that placebo. And so I think the strongest example of this is with placebo surgery, and this is a fascinating study that was done, and again there's a video posted briefly about it, but knee surgery is probably one of the most common surgeries that people need to have. There's a lot of ways you can wreck your knee and a lot of knee pain, particularly with an arthritis of the knees. And so this is, again, one of the most common surgeries, and this researcher and doctor was interested in, are we really helping people with these surgeries, or is this really, are some of the recoveries that are coming from this just due to the placebo effect of the surgery? And so what he did was do a placebo study on this surgery. And so there were 3 groups of participants. All of them had needed or thought they needed some type of knee surgery. They had chronic arthritis of their knees, and there was nothing else that no other treatments were working. And so they went in to the hospital, and they were put in 1 of 3 conditions, and all of them they believed they were having real knee surgery. But in one of the conditions, they actually got that knee surgery. In the other, in 2 of the others, it was basically a sham surgery. They cut the knee open and just injected some salt water in there, or just cut the knee open and did nothing. And so again, these are not active treatments that should do nothing. And so what they found with this is, if you look at this graph here, these are the 3 different procedures. These are, so the debridement was, I believe, just putting the water in. The lavage was the actual surgery that they did, and the placebo was they did just absolutely nothing. They just cut the knee open. And what's important to see in this is just that there really was no significant difference in those 3 groups. So it made no difference which type you got. In all of them, people reported some lessening of pain. There was no difference really in their functionality, but they did report less pain, and everybody thought they got the real knee surgery. And so this just really shows that importance of the psychology of this. If you're expecting to get better, there is some evidence that people do spontaneously, their body does show some physical signs of healing. And so, again, you can see this in the characteristics of some of the placebo effect things. So bigger pills tend to be more effective than smaller pills. Again, they're both just sugar pills. The physician is important, so how confident they appear to be in that placebo is important. And this is why double-blind studies are so key, right? If you're conducting a study and you know one of the treatment conditions to be a placebo and one of them to be real, you're likely to sort of show that to your patient in some way, and so confidence is really important. And this also suggests that, even if you're using an active treatment, the confidence that your physician gives you in that working is likely to impact how effective that treatment is for you. This also shows that patient characteristics matter. What people believe about an illness matters how effective that placebo is, and so people who believe more in medication being an effective way of treating illness, they're more susceptible to the placebo effect than people who think that medication is not really the best way to treat illness. Personality matches work as well here too. So if you frame the way that the placebo is going to work in terms of the person's personality and appeal to those, that tends to match as well. And so, again, this is just highlighting that we do need to take into account these social factors, right? How your physician is interacting with you, and psychological things about how we think about big versus small pills and what that means, and how our own personality and our beliefs impact the effectiveness of this totally fake treatment, but still change the nature of how effective it is. So our beliefs matter. So our expectancy is really key in this placebo effect. You can account for the positive effect of placebos through this expectancy. If someone thinks a placebo is going to lessen their pain, then they feel like their pain is less. But you can also see the nocebo effect. If you give somebody a pill and you say this, there's a really common side effect of this is a lot of headaches. It's just a sugar pill. People will report getting that side effect, and this is the nocebo effect. So you can induce both positive and negative effects based on these expectancies. So the more believable the placebo is, the more likely it is to work. That's why the doctor confidence matters. That's why these more involved placebos, if you think you're getting this whole surgery, like why would you do that if it's not real? Of course it's going to work. Those tend to be the most effective. But interestingly, some really recent work has shown that even known placebos can work. So you can actually tell a person, this is a placebo drug. It has no active ingredients in terms of your physiology. However, taking this has been shown due to psychological influence actually improve people's health. And telling people that, you can still evoke that placebo effect and show physiological change in them. And it actually is an effective medication. Again, this is not saying that we should just abandon medicine and give everybody placebos, because certainly medical treatments that really do have some type of intervention and work are effective and more effective than a placebo. That's why that's our standard for testing a new drug, right? It should work better than just expecting to get better. But through looking at what placebos themselves do, in addition to comparing them to active treatments, shows us how important these psychological and social factors are in our health outcomes. So just some fun for us. This is a little comic. Says some researchers are starting to figure out the mechanism behind the placebo effect, and so we've used their work to create a new drug, the placebo effect blocker. Now we just need to run a trial. We'll get two groups, give them both placebos, and then give one the real placebo blocker and the other wait. Uh-oh. My head hurts. Mine too. Here, wait. Here's a sugar pill. So, and then honey, talked to him. He just found out he's a placebo. So, again, why do we need this biopsychosocial model? Just to sum this up, because these social and psychological factors do interact with biological factors to impact health, and we're going to talk about that throughout this course. These were just a few examples here of that. Also, because behavior is a key determinant of health. It's not the only one. Our behavior is not the only thing that determines whether we get sick or not. Certainly all kinds of other factors outside our control occur. But for many of the leading causes of death and chronic illness, there are behavioral things that we can do to prevent or to mitigate the negative outcomes of that. Oops. And so basically that takes us right back to where we started of what is health psychology? Well, it examines the psychological, the social, and the behavioral factors that impact health. That's the biopsychosocial model, and it emphasizes facilitating positive health behaviors and reducing negative ones. And so it really is born out of this history and matches right on to this biopsychosocial model.